She handed me an envelope, the paper soft from being handled and rehandled, opened and closed like a prayer that never quite gets answered. Inside was $300 in 20s and 50s, money she'd been hiding from Daddy for months, weeks and months. Tucked into the hem of the curtains, she'd been sewing from old sheets, the way her mother had hidden money in cookie jars and under loose floorboards, all those tiny revolutions that never quite added up to escape velocity. "It's not enough," she whispered, and I heard the apology in her voice, the way poor people always apologize for not having enough when the world is the one that should be sorry. But I took the money because pride doesn't pay for textbooks and survival means knowing when to accept help that breaks the giver's heart to offer. The storm intensified, rain coming sideways through the broken window, and we formed a strange tableau. Daddy bleeding and promising, Mama broken and giving. Me standing between them with acceptance letter, crinkling in my pocket like paper armor that wouldn't stop bullets, but might deflect some of the smaller shrapnel life throws at people like us. May wandered in, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and I saw her see Daddy's blood, saw her file it away with all the other memories she'd unpack in therapy someday, if we ever figured out how to get therapy for people whose insurance is hope. Nothing goes wrong. And she climbed into my lap like she used to before she got too big to carry, before the world taught her that needing comfort was a luxury we couldn't afford. "Take me with you," she whispered, and I felt the weight of that request settle on my shoulders like a cloak made of chains and feathers. Because leaving meant abandoning her to this sinking ship, but staying meant drowning alongside her. And Mama's eyes met mine with a message clear as any billboard. Go, run, don't look back. Save yourself because we can't save you, and you can't save us until you learn to swim in different waters. The next morning brought sunshine that felt obscene in its cheerfulness, light streaming through broken windows, like it didn't know the difference between ruins and palaces. And I packed my life into 2 garbage bags, clothes that didn't quite fit right. Books with cracked spines that had been my education when the school system failed me. The tiny ceramic elephant Mama gave me for my 10th birthday. All those fragments of who I'd been that might somehow add up to who I could become. Daddy was gone, probably at the bar that opened at 6 a.m. for people who couldn't wait for respectable drinking hours, and Mama stood at the stove making pancakes from mix that had expired 2 years ago. The kind of breakfast that says, "I love you," in a language composed of whatever we have instead of what we wish we could give. May clung to my waist like I was the last solid thing in a world made of quicksand, and I promised her things I wasn't sure I could deliver. Weekend visits, phone calls every day, a future where she wouldn't have to hide her inhaler because Daddy sold it for beer money. All those promises that taste like hope, but sometimes choke you on the way down. The Greyhound station sat like a temple of transition on the edge of town, its fluorescent lights humming hymns to all the people who'd passed through seeking different lives. And I clutched my ticket, like it was a passport, to a country where girls like me got to be more than statistics. Where broken homes were something you read about instead of something you survived. The bus driver looked at my garbage bags with eyes that had seen every kind of baggage. Suitcases held together with duct tape, cardboard boxes tied with string, human cargo carrying their worlds in plastic shopping bags. And he just nodded, because people who work the routes between nowhere and somewhere understand that escape rarely. As we pulled away, I saw Mama and May standing in the parking lot, getting smaller and smaller until they were just specks against the vastness of everything I was leaving behind. and I pressed my forehead to the window glass that was cold, even in Mississippi heat, feeling the miles stretch between us like threads that might break or might become the strings that someday pull us all to safety. The journey took 36 hours through landscapes that changed like slow-motion seasons, kudzu-covered hills giving way to pine forests surrendering to coastal plains, each mile a small death of who I'd been, and small birth of who I might become. And I learned that bus seats make poor beds, but excellent classrooms for studying the geography of escape. Somewhere in Alabama, the woman next to me offered peanut butter crackers and told me her daughter was at Tulane studying something called biomedical engineering. Words that sounded like foreign spells that might conjure futures where mothers didn't have to choose between rent and their children's dreams. And I ate the crackers even though peanut butter made my throat itch, because hunger has no allergies. We stopped at stations that sold postcards of places nobody wants to visit, where vending machines offered soda warmer than the air temperature, where bathroom stalls provided more education about human desperation than any textbook. And I collected these moments like specimens. Proof that the world was larger than the square mile I'd been born into, larger than the stories that said girls like me stayed put. Jackson appeared like a promise that might be kept, its streets lined with oak trees that had survived more storms than I had years, its buildings wearing history like proud scars. And I stepped off the bus into air that smelled different. Not better, not worse, just different enough to remind me that geography changes more than location. It changes possibility. The university rose like a castle made of red brick and white columns, its clock tower chiming the hour, like it was announcing that my life could start now. But all those years of being the girl who got A's while raising her sister and cleaning up her father's messes had led to this moment where I could trade survival for living, reaction for action, being acted upon for acting. My dorm room was smaller than our kitchen back home, but it was mine. The key heavy in my hand, like it weighed more than metal, like it weighed all the dreams that had been deferred in my family for generations. Heady. And when I closed the door behind me, I heard the click echo, like a gunshot that wasn't firing at me for once. The first weeks were a blur of newness. Professors who spoke in complete sentences without slurring, classmates who'd never wondered where their next meal was coming from. Libraries where books were free instead of stolen from the donation bin behind the church. And I walked through it all like I was dreaming with my eyes open, waiting for someone to shake me awake back into the nightmare I'd always known. But slowly, cell by cell, I began to build a new kind of life. Learned that office hours weren't punishments but opportunities, that raising your hand wasn't showing off but participating, that there were words for the things I'd felt. Anxiety, trauma, resilience, and that naming them gave me power over them, instead of letting them unnamed and uncontrolled inside my chest, like feral animals. May's calls became lifelines stretched across 300 miles, her voice small, but growing stronger as she told me about school plays she'd auditioned for, books she was reading that I'd sent her, the way Mama had started hiding money in new places, inside the hollowed-out Bible, taped behind the crucifix, like she was building an escape fund for both of them. This time, the nursing program hit me like advanced survival training, learning how bodies worked when they weren't being broken but healed, how to read vital signs that told stories more honest than words, how to touch people without causing pain. And I discovered that my years of cleaning up after disasters had taught me steady hands and calm voices, skills that translated from survival to service. Clinical rotations took me to hospitals where I met people carrying their own invisible baggage, veterans with phantom limb pain, mothers with postpartum depression, children whose illnesses were just bad luck in a universe that sometimes random cruelty, and I saw how poverty wore different faces, but the same exhausted eyes, how middle-class families could be one diagnosis away from the kind of desperation I'd thought belonged only to people like us. The semester I took psychiatric nursing felt like someone had written textbooks about my family, all those names for what happened when trauma went untreated, when addiction was self-medication, when violence was learned behavior passed down like heirlooms nobody wanted but couldn't throw away. And I started to understand that surviving wasn't the same as healing, that breaking cycles required more than just wanting them broken. I started volunteering at the free clinic downtown, treating people who couldn't afford insurance, whose pain was compounded by the knowledge that they were choosing between medicine and rent. And I saw my mother in every woman who apologized for needing help. My father in every man who got angry, because anger was safer than admitting fear. Myself in every teenager who flinched when voices got raised. The calls home became more complicated. Mama's voice stronger as she started working nights at the nursing home. Daddy's absence more permanent after his third WWII finally landed him in county jail. May's excitement about applying to the same program that had saved me. And I learned that distance could be healing, but also revealing, showing patterns that were too close to see when you were inside them. Like how you can't read a label when you're inside the bottle. My professors started talking about graduate school, about how some students had the grades and the drive to go further. And I laughed the first time, because higher education had always seemed like a ladder that ended at bachelor's degree for people like me. It's either people like me. But they kept talking, and I started listening, realizing that education wasn't a destination but a vehicle. And I'd been so focused on getting out that I hadn't thought about where I might go once I was free to choose direction. The research project I joined studied intergenerational trauma in rural communities, how poverty and violence left marks on DNA, how resilience could be learned and taught. And suddenly, my life wasn't just a story of survival, but a case study in possibility. Forms a family's pain having purpose if I could use it to help others understand that cycles could be broken, that where you started didn't have to determine where you finished. May got accepted with a scholarship that was larger than mine, because she'd had me as proof that girls from our zip code could succeed. And when she called to tell me, we both cried in the parking lot of the grocery store where I'd once shoplifted diapers. Our tears watering the asphalt where our new lives were taking root, growing toward different suns, but from the same broken ground. Daddy wrote letters from prison that I didn't answer for months, his handwriting shaky from withdrawal and regret. Pages of apologies that came too late to matter, but too early to ignore completely. And when I finally wrote back, it wasn't forgiveness, but acknowledgement. A letter that said I understood he'd been sick, not evil. That understanding wasn't the same as excusing that healing might be possible, but trust would have to be earned in increments smaller than the damage had been dealt. The day I graduated felt like standing at the intersection of every possible future, my family scattered across different states of repair. Mama working double shifts to save for May's dorm supplies, Daddy attending our meetings in the prison chapel. May finishing high school with honours and a confidence that came from seeing someone she shared DNA with succeed, and me wearing a cap and gown that felt like armor made of accomplishment, walking across a stage that had once seemed as distant as the moon. My first job as an RN paid more money than my family had seen in years, and I sent some home, but kept enough to build the kind of life that could be a lifeboat for others, extra room in my apartment for May when she started school, savings account for Mama's eventual escape, therapy sessions for myself, because I'd learned that you can't pour from empty cups and that healing isn't linear but spiral. Coming back around to the same wounds, but each time with more tools, more understanding, more choice. The clinic where I worked full-time served the same community I'd come from, and I saw how representation mattered, how patients trusted me because I spoke their language of survival, understood that I can't afford that, wasn't code for, I don't want to try. Knew that sometimes the best medicine was being seen by someone who'd walked similar paths and made it through to tell the story without judgment or pity, but with solid recognition that said, your pain is real and your possibilities are real too. Years passed in increments of healing, Mama finally leaving Daddy when he got out, moving into a small apartment with yellow curtains that she chose herself, May graduating and starting her own journey toward becoming a social worker, because she'd learned that changing systems required people who understood them from the inside. All of us slowly becoming different versions of ourselves, while still carrying the scars that told us where we'd been and how far we'd come. The invitation came to speak at the high school we'd attended, to tell current students that their circumstances weren't destiny, and standing in that auditorium felt like standing inside my own past, looking out at faces that wore the same mixture of hope and hopelessness I'd worn. And I told them the truth, that escaping poverty wasn't just about working hard, because we'd all been working hard since we were children, that it required luck and help and systems that sometimes worked and sometimes failed, that success wasn't a moral virtue, but a complex equation of timing, support, and stubborn refusal to surrender. I told them about the nights I'd cried in my car because I couldn't afford groceries, about the professors who saw something in me I couldn't see yet, about the sister who believed because she'd watched me believe first, about the father whose addiction taught me that love isn't always enough. But that doesn't mean love isn't real. About the mother whose quiet strength showed me that survival is revolutionary when the world expects you to die. The story I shared wasn't inspirational in the way those assemblies usually wanted. It was complicated and messy. Full of systems that failed people I loved, full of the recognition that for every success story there were dozens who didn't make it out, and that wasn't their fault, but the fault of structures that needed dismantling and rebuilding with different blueprints, different materials, different assumptions about who deserved to thrive. After the speech, a girl waited until everyone left, her eyes holding questions too big for the auditorium, and she asked how you know when it's time to leave, how you know when staying is killing you slower, but leaving might kill you faster. And I saw in her the same calculation I'd made, that sometimes the choice isn't between good and bad, but between different kinds of surviving, that leaving requires more than just wanting to leave. It requires resources and plans, and the kind of hope that feels impossible when you're still in the middle of the fire. We sat in the empty auditorium and made a plan, not just dreams but concrete steps, the phone numbers of shelters and programs, the names of people who could help, the recognition that escaping poverty isn't a single act, but a long journey that starts with one decision followed by hundreds more. Each one requiring courage that looks different from the outside than it feels from within. That bravery sometimes looks like staying, and sometimes looks like leaving, and sometimes looks like asking for help when everything in your life has taught you that help isn't coming. The years keep unfolding in ways that surprise me, not because I've forgotten where I started, but because I have learned that distance doesn't mean disconnection, that I can be proud of how far I've come while still being angry about how hard it had to be. That success isn't about leaving your past behind, but about carrying it with you in ways that honour both the struggle and the survival, that transform wounds into wisdom, without forgetting that wounds shouldn't be necessary for wisdom to grow. May and I share an apartment now, 2 bedrooms, so we each have space to be ourselves without being reminded of when we shared a bed to stay warm when the heat got cut off. And Mama visits on weekends, bringing homemade biscuits that taste like reconciliation. Like the possibility that love can evolve, even when it can't forget, that families can reconfigure themselves into new shapes that hold both the breaking and the mending in the same embrace. The clinic has grown into a proper health centre with funding I helped secure by telling our stories to people who controlled budgets but didn't understand lives, and I've learned that advocacy is another form of healing. That changing individual lives requires changing the systems that shape those lives, that my grandmother's hands stirring beans over a wood stove, and my hands inserting 4 into arms that look like hers, are connected by threads stronger than DNA. Threads made of determination and the refusal to let circumstances define possibility. Sometimes I still wake up at 3:17 a.m. The time when engines cough and decisions get made, and for a moment I'm back in that car with garbage bags for luggage, driving toward a future I couldn't quite believe in yet. But now the darkness holds different shapes. Possibility instead of just survival. Choice instead of just reaction. Choiced reaction. The knowledge that every ending is also a beginning, depending on which direction you choose to face, which stories you choose to tell, which wounds you choose to let heal into scars that remind you not of what broke you, but of what you survived to become whole.